First and foremost, I want to thank and say that I'm grateful to the all, everything that is, was, and will be. I'm grateful for all the people that stick by my side consistently and are always supporting me, through ups and downs, and all the people that contribute to, whether it be little or big, being at this, this layoff period, going through this transition, moving, and all this stuff, it's been a real rocky road and down time. So it's like I ain't been able to do the things, and I wasn't able to have everything I needed to sustain myself in certain fields. So a lot of people helped me with little things, sending me a little money here, there, help me renew my ID, just little stuff. Some people helped me, give me a couple dollars, help go towards my storage, just little things, even, like the smallest things, like it was much appreciated because it helped me in a time of need, and I'm so grateful for that as well. And, even through like the down times when I'm going through little chaotic periods, people that individually reached out to me privately, gave me wise and encouraging words. But what I'm about to say right now, I want to tell you how the universe really works in cause and effect, because it's wild how things fall into place. You do shadow work, you do things behind the scene that other people don't see, and just believing and being steadfast in your belief and having a plan, and just sticking to it no matter what. Some days I get up, I don't want to work out, some days I get up, I'm like, I don't want to read this book right now or do this YouTube video. But I know consistency is everything, being persistent and consistent, you never let up, especially if you got a plan. Because once you make a plan, it's never easy. You can visualize it one way, but when you want to manifest it, it's a whole nother way. There's like a lot of obstacles that come in the way throughout the process of all of that, But God is good, the universe is good, And through this process, again, thank you to everybody that did help me. It was a very few, but spiritually, a lot of people that reached out and gave me wise words of encouragement, on the downhill side of things, picked me back up, kept going. But let me tell you how things work. So throughout all this process, I didn't know if I was coming or going or where I was going to end up. But, like you said, God works in mysterious ways. So I ended up where I was supposed to be for a reason. That's why I tell people, monitor every moment. A lot of people go through moments throughout their day. It's so many distractions out here. And a lot of times we miss the point of the why, the cause and effect, the why and what things are happening, good and bad. Because a lot of people get down and depressed about bad things, but they don't know certain things have to happen for a reason, there's no judgment, there's no salvation without judgment or chaos, Chaos, we go through these dark times because once our backs are against the wall, those are the things that trigger us to make us feel uncomfortable. We can't be comfortable in simplicity, So that trigger us to want to do more. Or you say to yourself, like, I don't want to feel like this no more. I want to get out of this situation. I want to do better. I want to get to a higher place, where I am comfortable at, But that's not always an easy thing, And through the process of that, you live and you learn, it's trial and error, you go through some things to know some things, and, you go through these trials and tribulations, but it's all like a test for you to overcome, and never look at any bad situation that it's that bad, because like I said, everything is happening for a reason, whether you acknowledge it or you it goes over your head and you miss the point, you're going to come back to that point once you see, you know, the domino effect, the chain reaction of the why and the what. You know, as I came up here, yeah, I ended up at my mom's house, you know, but my mom's been sick, so I kind of been helping her in so many different ways, little do I know, you know, and kind of helping her overcome her own personal health and chaos that was stirring within her home that wasn't good for her health as well. But, you know, through all of that, you know, I was in a town where it was a lot of distractions, there's a lot of temptations, you know, a lot of negative, low vibrational energy. You know, it's like a loophole, a trap, you know, even though, you know, people would see me, they was like, oh, yeah, he dressed nice, you know, he keep up the party, yeah, he had his own house, he this and that. But, you know, from the outside looking in, you know, things could look good, but that don't mean everything is always all peachy. You know, that don't mean that the people don't know what you're really going through inside or what your day-to-day is like, you know. They'll just look at you, they'll see a perception, you know. You know, they have this perception in their head, but they don't really know the half of what you go through, you know, eternally within yourself and how you make it through, you know. But, you know, they're just like, oh, he's doing good, thriving, yeah, because you come out, you still do what you're supposed to do, you still smiling, you know, but behind the scenes, people, they just don't know the half, you know. And like I said, I ended up where I ended up. That's why I say I ended up where I'm supposed to be, you know, through all of this, because it always gets greater later, you know. Nothing stays the same forever, you know. It's just it's a moment, it's a flash in life, you know. It's momentary, you know. You can't be stuck, you know, forever, you know, in that feeling. You got to undo that feeling, come out of that feeling, you know, because that feeling is like your fuel, you know, because you don't want to feel a certain type of way. So the key is to do something about it, you know, and that's what I did, you know. I've always been spiritual, I've always been prayed up, you know, but it took, you know, the dark phase and for me to remove myself and be in isolation. I kind of call that like the walk in the wilderness, where you find yourself. There's no distractions, you know, it's just you. It might seem boring as hell, yeah. It gets very boring, but, you know, like they say, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So that's why you got to keep yourself occupied. You got to find hobbies. You got to find the things you like, the things you do. And you got to reflect your intentions more on them. You know, put your mind in these other places instead of focus and stuck on things that are low vibrational, unbeneficial, you know, and are stationary and they're not moving, you know. You got to move. So in the process of all of this, you know, I literally was going through some things and know some things. But one thing I never give up on is my faith and my belief. You know, it seemed like more dark energy and my back becomes against the wall, or people plot against me, or, you know, just doing a bunch of naive things, or, you know, you always see a consistency and pattern. It's never, the way I see it, and with my spiritual eye, it's like if you see the same behavior over and over in people, places, and things, all at the same time, while, you know, existing within a space, you know, or being in a certain place, you know something is up. You know, you can connect the dots, you know. It's not hard, you know. Me, I'm a very analytical person, you know. I see every detail. It's like my brain is like a computer, you know. And I watch every consistency and pattern. That's how I find out every truth, you know. I can care less what anybody say. People tell me stuff all the time. Yeah, I take it into consideration. I take heed, but, you know, I start looking at it from every angle, and then I start narrowing things down, and then I come to a singular answer, you know, because people will lie to you, but you're not going to lie to yourself, you know. And people lie to themselves all the time, you know. They live in a fairy tale, make-believe reality, you know. You know, it just looks a certain way on camera or looks a certain way on paper, but in all reality, it is not that way. It's just a facade. It's like makeup, you know. It's just covering up the blemish, but the blemish is still there once the makeup comes off. So that's why you got to be the same, keep the same energy. So through the process of all of this, you know, I start getting into my spiritual practices even more. You know, I start calling my power back to me. Like on a daily basis, I'm always saying, I break all spells that keep me blinded to my own magic, and I take back the life force energy that has been taken from me. I do that multiple times throughout the day, and I even say even longer affirmations, you know, different spiritual prayers and affirmations that connect to angels, the elements, you know, different positive energy. And I'm consistently fighting against, you know, negative forces, because whether people know, you know, these things work through people, places, and things. People have spirits on them. I call them jumping spirits. You know, they latch onto you, and they will rub off onto you, you know, if you're not mindful and aware of how these things work. So through the process of all this, I've been up here where I'm at now for about a month now. You know, within the first week of me being up here, I literally start detoxing myself. I started back working out. I started off small. First week, start doing little basic exercises. Each week, I start going up another number, you know. I do this every year, but, you know, this was the right time, you know. Through all that, I start going back into my books. Like I said, I was doing prayers, affirmations, day and night, you know, spiritually cleansing myself, and just kept being consistent. So as I'm calling my power back to me, I noticed I start getting this relief, you know. Things started feeling lighter and lighter and lighter. And I was like, I got this under control. So each day I had a thing. I got a resume on Indeed. So a lot of them jobs, you know, you don't really have to fill out full applications. So I was literally filling out 3 applications a day, applying for 3 jobs a day for almost 21 days straight. And some jobs I had to go on the site, do the full application, so on and so on. You know, eventually I believe something's going to come through, but just at the right time. It's not when I want it to, but at the perfect time, and it will happen. So I go to this job the other day, you know, the day that y'all see me made a reel when I said I'm interview ready. You know, coincidentally, as I was coming up here, like my mom knows, like my spiritual belief system is different. You know, I use a lot of spiritual tools like sage. I deal with crystals. You know, I deal with, you know, sun gazing. I deal with planetary hours of angels when I call on certain things. You know, under the moonlight, you know, reflecting, taking things away from my life. And I pray for a lot of other people. I meditate and direct energy their ways and try to break strongholds and things of that nature. People don't know. You wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and rulers of the darkness, you know, so, and high and wicked places, you know. You know, the world, it is given into the hands of the wicked, so there is more wickedness roaming this earth than it is good, you know. Don't ever get caught up in perception of how a person looks. And, you know, you don't judge them by the way they look, but like Martin Luther King said, by the contents of their character. And so on, as I'm back to the spiritual tools, my mom was like, yeah, they got this spiritual store up here with the stuff you like. You know, she started buying me like little candles, you know, different color candles, because the color codes of candles, you know, when you use them at a certain time, they reflect the different angels, you know, and chakra systems in the body, because a lot of the angels are eternal angels, you know, they're just connected to you. You know, angels are angels of light, you know, enlightenment, and entities are different energies, you know, that latch on and move to and through you, you know, and they move all around the earth, all along the ley line grids, and, you know, but the key, you know, in order for no weapon formed against you to prosper, you have to know how the workers of iniquity work. So I don't care what anybody says. Patterns do not lie, you know. Just like biblically it will say, you will know them by their fruits. The fruits is the things that they're producing, you know, the nature of them. And everything has a pattern. Everything has an algorithm. So People will smile in your face all day. I don't care about none of that, because guess what? Anybody that is trying to siphon my energy or direct or reflect certain intentions on me, guess what? I'm not the one, because as a collective whole, I don't never single an individual out to reverse a spell or curse or an intention. I hit them all at once as a collective whole, So anybody that is transmuting that energy in the atmosphere by those thoughts or they might have against me or whispering about me behind their back, guess what? I guarantee you they all going through some type of galactic karma right now, or things ain't going good in their life, or they're going through a Great Depression or some type of, downfall, because we are in a cycle of karma. This is what they call the death and the rebirth state. Age of Aquarius, age of information, that correlates with the word apocalypse, which means the great revealing. Like, this is the time everything is going to be revealed. Everything that's in the dark is going to come to the light. So back to my mom telling me about the spiritual store. Says you need to check it out. They have everything in there you like, from crystals, sage, different kind of, spiritual tools. You know how it goes. If you're into the type of things I'm into nature, because God is the all, and all is in nature, Nature is a nurturer, This is where we was created, in nature, just like the human resonance. Frequency is the same as the human body, That's why nature can heal us as well. So I go to the interview the other day, when y'all see me interview ready and real. So at this interview, it was at a auto parts warehouse, where they like a third party, packaging and receiving company that does, that ships out and scans and, does the inventory of auto parts. So I go there. So as I'm in the interview, throughout the interview, two ladies I'm talking to, I'm answering questions, giving a rundown of my background, blah, blah, blah. And, the topic came up, like, what kind of hobbies do you have? So, I go into it like I was talking about, I'm a spiritualist. I get into, knowledge, forbidden knowledge, esoteric knowledge. Because esoteric is like the spiritual aspect of all the physical external things that they teach you in religious institutions, So I study that. I grew up with that. But now I'm more into the spiritual and knowing how those things work in the shadow world, behind the scenes. So I started explaining that. She was like, wow, that's interesting. You know what the lady said? She said, I have my own store out here. She basically said, I sell, the sage, crystals, told me the name of the store. I was like, yeah, people been telling me about this store. I have yet to go there and check it out yet. She was like, yeah. She said, yeah. She was telling me a story about some guy that was coming in, the books that she had got. And she was talking about the Sumerian text and all this other stuff. I was like, yeah, I know all about it new. Showed her the tattoo, showed her the uncle, whatever. She was infatuated, So, next thing you know, because I already knew she clicked, the spark went off. Like, bang. I was the one. So, I kind of knew I had the job from right there at that point. I was like, and she said, oh, she didn't say I'm going to call you in a week. She said, you'll know by Wednesday. Wednesday come around, bang, got the job, But, you see, my point is, I say that to say this. You see how the universe works in the strangest ways. And nothing is by coincidence. It's all by design. You just got to wait your time in line. Everything will fall into place. You just have to be persistent and consistent at what you do. Don't doubt yourself, not one bit, because doubt creates discouragement. Discouragement is the opposite of encouragement. Encouragement will bring you up. Discouragement will bring you down. I look at everything on an energy level now, When I read people, I'm reading energy. I don't care what your body language is, because people, they'll portray to be something that they're not, so they'll put on an act. I call them actors, like a lot of people play so many roles, you would think that they was from Hollywood, but they do that all for the approval of other people, people pleasing, and, just to fit in. If you can't be liked for just being yourself and who you are as a person, then something ain't right. Because I always think about it. Many are called, few are chosen. Your job is not to follow other people and what they're doing. I have a leader mentality. I pave the way. I set the trends. I don't follow them. I'm a unique character. I do things that other people don't do. Not to say that some people don't do them, but I mix things up in my own way, just like my studies. I don't just study off of one spiritual book. I study every culture book, and I find the consistencies and pattern in it. God is not subject to one thing or one book. God is the all. Everything it is, was, and will be. And you have to notice, every culture, they have their own language, and everybody, perceives things a different way. So the way that they might explain it or, put it out there, and then a lot of times they create the images that correlate with their culture, or their genetic background. And people, the devil's job is to kill, steal, and destroy, and deceive the whole world. So how do you do that? You divide and conquer. When you divide and conquer something, you split things up into divisions, different denominations, different sectors of a belief system. But when you do that, what people believe, nobody's right or wrong. Just everybody has a different piece of the puzzle in a different way. So that's where I come into play, and I find the consistencies and the patterns, and I study. I do the translations, names, meaning, and a lot of things correlate with each other. But people, you have a piece of the puzzle. But a lot of people, they want to argue with you to say, oh, my religion is better than your religion. Oh, this is the only way to get to God. Before Christianity, Islam, and any of these things was a religion, guess what? People had direct connections to God, Whether they was in Gnostics, Essenes, and things of that nature. These were all people that were in tune with nature. Later people, people that were able to self-heal, heal other people and had a direct connection with God. They would call them, names, bywords, proverbs, like they still do today. They call them witches, they call them all types of things, Yeah, there's different ideologies to things, but, metaphysics is just a natural science of nature, being in tune with nature. You are connected to nature, and when it's like your phone. When you pair with something like Bluetooth, it literally, you become compatible with it. When you become compatible with it, you're working together in harmony and synchronization. So that's when it becomes, that connection, and that's the whole plan for humanity. That's why a lot of us and things are going the way they are on the planet, because we can't work together in harmony. Everybody's working in derision and division, and people are robbing Peter to pay Paul type thing, and that's where a lot of things, is just basically I'm trying to get to a point, but I'm going to bring this person down in the process of me trying to get to this point or hold on to this type of power. It's not sharing, or they're selling information or selling things that God put on this planet that's enough for everybody, but they created and turned it into a business and a market of something of that nature. This is the ways of the world and the way the world thinks, But the more I've been studying, in order to receive, the gifts of God, the true gifts of God, you only can receive them if you have the intention, not for self alone, but with the purpose of sharing with others, That's what it's all about, That's the reason why death exists today, because we lost harmony and touch with that, The whole plan for us to sin, for us to be in our 1,000-year millennial reign, is for us to be in harmony. So that's why, this great tribulation period, or 2/3 getting cut off, and then 144,000 being elected through all of that, because the population has to be decreases, because literally everybody can't get it, and some people are like parasites to the planet. They're harming nature. Everything is about a poison or neutralizing something with the poison. And that part of the Bible always stuck out to me. They will try to poison my elect ones, but they will not die. Look at the foods, poison. Look at the air, poison. Everything is just based off poison. There's some weed killers and this and that. Them weeds, those roots, and all those things have a purpose, Everything in nature has a purpose, whether it's to take another thing out of nature, decrease the population of it so it doesn't go out of control. That's nature's job, to do that. It's not our job as human beings to do that, we done overstepped a little too much in this world. And, that's why this great reset, this great economical collapse is in the process right now. The stage is set. Just look at the news, Mother Nature is setting right, because anybody that keeps poisoning something that is alive, living, existing organism that we live in and keeps harming it, you think it ain't gonna fight back? It's like an immune system that's being harmed by a parasite or something that is not good to it. It's gonna eventually start to reject it, try to, flush it out of its system, or, vomit it up, It's going to start getting more destructive with storms and everything else, and it's going to start cleansing it off the land and wiping it out. It's good, my man. And it's going to start wiping it off the land, That's what the Bible meant when it said in Revelation, sweeping the wicked off the land. And when it says wicked, it's people that are not aligned with the laws of nature. They defile nature, They do the most grotesque things to nature. They are abomination of desolation to everything that is, was, and will be that was already working in harmony. Nature is probably the closest thing that's still working in harmony outside of ourselves. We are no longer working in harmony, but the key right now is those that are waking up and becoming mindful and aware of their existence, who they are as a people, knowing there's something higher to this, acknowledging the wrong that is being done to nature. These are the people that are getting sealed in their forehead and not marked for the judgment. The judgment is going to pass over their head just like it passed over all the people that put that lamb's blood over their doorsteps in Egypt when the angel of death came that night and killed all the firstborns in Egypt. So think about that. This is what's like that same mark that was over the doorway in Passover is now a new mark that is eternally within your head. That's why it says, I will write a new law on your heart and consciousness. Your heart is in synchronicity, where it pumps the blood, the plasma that goes through the brain, the consciousness. It's the seal of consciousness. It tells you these other people are going to be marked on their hand. They're going to be marked on their hand because they worship the creature more than the creator. Their work and their blessings come from materialistic things. How I can gain so much money, and I can live lavishly. My heaven can be here right now, and I don't care what I got to do to get it and take it, and I don't care who gets in the way, who gets hurt by it, and we're going to keep these people down in this low place as long as possible, and we're going to keep going up, and up. But that ideology right there is what's causing the judgment, That's why all the people that are waking up and becoming mindful and aware of it, y'all are becoming the collective consciousness. You know how they used to say in church, when two or more are gathered in, the name of the Messiah, the great spirit is present. See, now more than one is gathered on a collective consciousness, which I call the Christ consciousness. And guess what is happening? It's like the two witnesses in Revelation. You know, weather is changing. People that were spiritually dead, like it says in the Market Street, for 3.5 days. That's a period of time. And are now rising to the people that suppressed them and put them down, you know, to their astonishment. And guess what? These people in these high and wicked places are seeing it. And I don't care what color you are, what you believe in, you know, because it's a multitude of people that are being put down and affected by it. I'm not just talking about one Pacific race, you know. At this point, you know, it's people from every ethnicity and race that are waking up to the fact of this. And, you know, and they're seeing, you know, most of us all know we've been lied to throughout history. And, you know, we've been promoting the narrative because this is what's been programmed in our heads to do. But this is the time that we become reborn, you know. And reborn means to be relearned, you know, relearn and accept the hard truth, you know. It's not about being superior, but it's about the facts, you know, the proof that's in the pudding, you know. And what I call a cleaver is one that cleaves to the truth, you know. And if you believe wholeheartedly in the truth, you know, truth will set you free. And it'll set you free from this judgment that is about to begin, you know. That's why it's on your heart's thought and conscience, because right now, you know, that is the signal for the death angel in these four winds, which you talk about in Revelation, after the seven seals are being broken, and that we're told not to harm the waters, harm the earth. And, you know, remember it said about the fourth angel poured its vial out upon the sun, and great calamities came upon the earth. If you pour a vial out upon the sun that deals with destruction, what is that? That's why you see sunspots right now, which are producing coronal mass ejection, and which is about that's what they're saying a solar flash is. Because when the poles shift, which is causes, it has an effect on every living organism below, which they call global warming, which has been happening. But now that we're in solar maximum, it's reaching its peak to a higher extent and degree at this time. So it's not a game right now. You see the powers being knocked out in Puerto Rico, Spain. You know, the storms that are hitting the south all through these ley lines. And look at just where these places are hitting. It's all on lands where blood was shed, you know. It even tells you in the book, you know, any land taken in blood is going to be repaid back in blood and destruction, you know, in multiple different ways. And it tells you in the plagues, you know, if you don't get hit by this plague, you know, rulers are going to kill each other amongst swords. Famine's going to hit in this place, you know, earthquakes in diverse places, weather in places that doesn't normally happen in this place, in that place, you know. The book, it says it all, but, you know how some people, they more focus on the perception or how the messenger looks instead of getting the message, and it goes over their head. They're looking for everything else to be wrong instead of what's right in it, you know. These are the people that are already doomed for. Those people, they're not going to get it, you know. Even look at every comment section and every chat or post. There's always a person that it always goes over their head, and they see the wrong in everything instead of what's right about it, you know. So, yeah, these are the times we're in. But I'm going to leave it at that. Y'all bless y'all, you know. I hope this is motivational to anybody that's going through something right now, because it does get greater later. But, you know, it's going to get easier later as well, because a lot of the things that create roadblocks, obstacles that stand in your way, that have that intention, you know, they're slowly but surely being eliminated and weaned out. Pay attention. Pay attention. It is happening. And the more people that wake up and become together on the collective consciousness, the Christ consciousness, the return, and return back to the original state, you know, as it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end. The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first. Salah, so be it.